Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of history's most legendary cities. A place so magnificent that even today, 2,500 years after its fall, we still use its name as a symbol of ultimate decadence and power. But here's the thing about Babylon. Everything you think you know about it is probably wrong. Hollywood showed you hanging gardens and golden palaces. The Bible painted it as the ultimate den of sin. Popular culture turned it into some kind of ancient Las Vegas. The reality? You wouldn't last 12 hours there without dying in one of about 50 different horrifying ways. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's 580 BCE, and you've just been magically transported to the greatest city in the ancient world. You're standing at the massive Ishtar Gate. Its blue glazed bricks decorated with dragons and bulls towering above you like some fever dream. The gate is beautiful, sure, but your first breath of Babylonian air hits you like a physical assault. The smell is overwhelming. Human waste, animal sacrifice, unwashed bodies, burning pitch, and something else you can't quite identify but makes your stomach turn. That something else? It's death. It's everywhere in this city. You think you understand ancient cities because you've seen movies or read books, but nothing prepares you for the sensory overload of stepping into genuine antiquity. The noise alone would drive you mad. Imagine the loudest, most chaotic market you've ever experienced. Then multiply it by 10 and add the constant sound of construction, religious chanting, animals being slaughtered, people arguing in languages you've never heard, and the occasional scream from someone being publicly executed. There's no escape from it because sound carries differently in a city made entirely of mud, brick, and stone. The crowds would terrify you. You're used to personal space, to people generally avoiding eye contact, to a certain level of predictable social interaction. Here, strangers grab you, shove past you, shout at you in Akkadian expecting responses you can't give. Children run through the streets covered in grime, many missing fingers or limbs from accidents or punishment. Beggars with horrifying diseases press against you. A beggar's with horrifying disease. And you quickly realize there's nowhere to run because the streets are narrow maze-like passages between towering walls. But let's say you somehow manage to keep your composure during those first few minutes. You start walking deeper into the city, and you notice something that makes your modern brain short-circuit. There are no street signs, no addresses, no maps, no logical grid system. The city grew organically over centuries, with buildings constructed on top of older buildings, creating a vertical labyrinth that defies all logic. Getting lost isn't just possible, it's inevitable. And being lost in ancient Babylon isn't like being lost in a modern city where you can ask for directions or use a phone. It's potentially a death sentence. The people you see walking around aren't extras from a movie about ancient times. These are real human beings who've never heard of antibiotics, who've never seen a dentist, who consider a bath a rare luxury. Their teeth are rotted. Their skin is marked by smallpox scars. Their bodies are twisted by malnutrition and unhealed injuries. The beautiful ancient people of Hollywood don't exist here. This is what humans actually looked like when medicine was basically guesswork and prayer. You quickly realize that your clothes mark you as a foreigner, and not the good kind of foreigner, the kind with money and connections. You're wearing strange materials, strange cuts, and you obviously don't belong. In a city where strangers are automatically suspect and foreigners are assumed to be either spies or criminals, this is a problem. The way people are looking at you isn't curious. It's calculating. They're measuring your worth, figuring out if you're worth robbing, enslaving, or just ignoring until you die of exposure. And speaking of dying, let's talk about the most immediate threat you face: the law. Babylon operates under the Code of Hammurabi, And if you think modern justice is harsh, you're about to get an education in what real brutality looks like. The code has 282 laws, and breaking any of them can result in death, mutilation, or slavery. Here's the really fun part. Ignorance isn't an excuse. You don't speak Akkadian? Too bad. You don't understand the local customs. Tough luck. You accidentally offend someone or break a rule you've never heard of. Welcome to your execution. The city that surrounds you represents the pinnacle of human achievement in 580 BCE, but it's built on suffering that's almost impossible to comprehend. Every brick was made by slaves working in conditions that would make modern sweatshops look humane. Every beautiful building required human sacrifice during construction, literally burying people alive in the foundations to appease the gods. Every luxury you see came at the cost of thousands of lives, and the casual acceptance of this brutality permeates every aspect of daily life. You're not just a tourist who happened to wander into the wrong neighborhood. You're a time traveler who's just discovered that the past isn't a foreign country with quaint customs. It's an alien world where the basic assumptions about human dignity, individual rights, and the value of life are completely different. And you're about to spend the next several hours learning exactly why your 21st century mind, body, and soul are completely unprepared for the reality of ancient Babylon. Welcome to the city where civilization was born, where writing was invented, where mathematics and astronomy reached new heights. Welcome to the place that gave us the first legal code, the first urban planning, the first libraries. Welcome to humanity's greatest achievement in 580 BCE. Try not to die before sunrise. Your first Babylonian morning, a masterclass in survival. You somehow survived your first night in Babylon, probably by finding shelter in some abandoned corner and staying very, very quiet. Now you're waking up to your first Babylonian dawn, and the reality of your situation is about to get so much worse. The sun isn't just rising over the city. It's exposing every horrifying detail that darkness mercifully hid the night before. Your body is already rebelling against this place in ways you didn't expect. You wake up covered in insect bites from creatures that don't exist in your time. Fleas, lice, and things you can't identify that have left angry red welts across your skin. Your throat is raw from breathing air thick with dust, smoke, and particles you don't want to think about too hard. Your stomach is cramping because you haven't eaten anything since you arrived. But eating here presents its own set of life-threatening challenges. The first thing you notice as you emerge from whatever hole you spent the night in is the smell. If you thought yesterday was bad, morning in ancient Babylon is when the city really starts to stink. This is when thousands of people begin their daily routines, which include emptying chamber pots into the streets, slaughtering animals for breakfast, and beginning the industrial processes that keep this civilization running. The air is thick enough that you can taste it, and what you're tasting is centuries of human habitation without modern sanitation. You need water, desperately. Your modern body, used to filtered, treated water delivered on demand, is already dehydrating in ways that ancient people's bodies adapted to handle. But water in Babylon is a death trap waiting to happen. The Euphrates River, which flows through the city, is the main water source, but it's also the city's sewer, industrial waste dump, and cemetery. Bodies of executed criminals, sacrificed animals, and people who died of disease are regularly thrown into the same water everyone drinks from. The public wells are much better. They're contaminated by seepage from waste pits, and the water sits stagnant long enough for every imaginable parasite to breed. You watch as locals draw water from these wells, and you notice something that chills your blood. Many of them have the telltale signs of waterborne diseases. Bloated stomachs, yellowed eyes, skin conditions that speak of chronic illness. These people drink this water every day because they have no choice, but their bodies pay the price in constant sickness. Even if you find relatively clean water, you face another problem. You have nothing to carry it in. In ancient Babylon, containers are precious possessions. Clay pots, leather bags, bronze vessels. These aren't disposable items you can pick up at a convenience store. They're expensive, carefully maintained tools that represent significant investment. Walking around without proper containers marks you immediately as someone with no resources, no connections, and no value to society. But let's say you somehow manage to find water and something to carry it in. Now you need food, and this is where your modern digestive system is going to betray you in spectacular fashion. Your gut bacteria, evolved to handle processed foods and modern diets, is completely unprepared for ancient Babylonian cuisine. The bread, which makes up the bulk of most people's diet, is made from grain that's stored in conditions you'd consider unsanitary. Mice, rats, and insects live in the grain stores, and their droppings are just considered part of the meal. The meat available in the markets isn't refrigerated, obviously, and food safety regulations don't exist. You'll see cuts of lamb, beef, and pork that have been hanging in the sun for hours or days, covered in flies, with vendors casually brushing off the maggots before making sales. The customers don't seem bothered by this because their immune systems have adapted over lifetimes of exposure to what you'd consider food poisoning. Your first meal of ancient meat would likely leave you vomiting and experiencing diarrhea so severe it could kill you through dehydration. Even the vegetables aren't safe. They're grown in fields fertilized with human waste and watered with the same contaminated river water everyone drinks. Parasitic worms are endemic in the food supply, and eating raw vegetables is basically guaranteed to infect you with intestinal parasites that will slowly starve you to death from the inside. The locals know this, which is why most food is heavily cooked, but that presents another problem. Fuel is expensive and cooking facilities are communal. You can't just fire up a stove in ancient Babylon. Fuel, wood, charcoal, or dried dough costs money you don't have. Cooking fires are community resources, often controlled by whoever owns the building or courtyard. Using someone else's fire without permission isn't just rude. It's theft, punishable by severe beating or worse. And the communal cooking areas are breeding grounds for arguments, fights, and violence as people compete for space and fuel. Speaking of money, you're about to discover that being broke in ancient Babylon is far more dangerous than being broke in any modern society. There's no social safety net, no government assistance, no charity organizations beyond whatever the temples occasionally provide. If you can't work, you can't eat. If you can't eat, you die. It's that simple. And the type of work available to someone with no connections, no local knowledge, and no understanding of the language is invariably dangerous, degrading, or both. Your clothes, which seemed like such a minor problem yesterday, are becoming a major issue. They're not designed for this climate, this level of physical activity, or this social environment. The fabric is wrong, the cut is wrong, and they're marking you as an outsider in increasingly dangerous ways. But getting new clothes means either buying them with money you don't have or taking them from someone else, which brings you face to face with Babylonian justice. The legal system you're now subject to doesn't recognize concepts like due process, presumption of innocence, or proportional punishment. If you're accused of theft, the burden of proof is on you to prove your innocence, not on your accuser to prove your guilt. And the methods of determining guilt include trial by ordeal, being thrown into the river to see if the gods save you, having hot metal pressed against your skin to see if it heals cleanly, or being forced to drink poison to test your honesty. As the morning progresses, you start to understand that survival in Babylon isn't just about finding food and shelter. It's about navigating a complex social system where making the wrong move can be fatal. Every interaction has rules you don't understand. Every transaction requires knowledge you don't possess. And every person you meet is evaluating whether you're useful, dangerous, or disposable. The sun is getting higher, the day is getting hotter, and your modern body is already struggling with heat that the locals consider normal. You have no hat, no understanding of how to stay cool, and no access to the shade that wealthy people take for granted. Heat exhaustion is becoming a real possibility. And in a city where weakness equals death, collapsing from the heat might be the last mistake you ever make. Welcome to day one of trying to survive in humanity's first great city. The morning is barely half over, and you're already discovering that every single thing you take for granted in modern life — clean water, safe food, basic medical care, legal protections, social services — simply doesn't exist here. And the day is just getting started. Justice Babylonian style. When laws were written in blood, you've made it through your first morning in Babylon. But now you're about to encounter something that will fundamentally shake your understanding of justice, fairness, and human rights. You're about to witness the Code of Hammurabi in action, and it's going to be the most brutal education in jurisprudence you could possibly imagine. What you think you know about ancient law from movies and textbooks is about to be shattered by the reality of justice in a world where mercy is weakness and forgiveness is stupidity. You're walking through one of Babylon's main squares when you hear shouting and see a crowd gathering. Your curiosity gets the better of you, a mistake that could cost you dearly, and you push forward to see what's happening. In the center of the crowd, a woman is being dragged forward by two guards. She's maybe 20 years old, covered in bruises and screaming in terror. Behind her, a man follows, his face twisted with rage. You don't understand the Akkadian being shouted, but the situation becomes clear quickly. This is a trial, and you're about to witness Babylonian justice firsthand. The woman has been accused of adultery. In your modern world, this might be grounds for divorce, therapy, or social drama. In Babylon, it's a capital offense. But here's where your 21st century brain is going to short circuit. The trial doesn't involve evidence presentation, witness testimony, or legal representation. Instead, the woman is going to be subjected to trial by ordeal, and you're about to watch a human being die based on what amounts to divine gambling. The guards drag her toward the Euphrates River. The crowd follows, and you find yourself swept along by the mob mentality that governs public events in ancient cities. The principle behind trial by ordeal is simple and terrifying. If the gods want her to live, they'll save her. If she's guilty, they'll let her die. It's not just primitive superstition. It's the foundation of Babylonian legal thinking. The gods are the ultimate judges, and human courts are just facilitating their decisions. They bind her hands and throw her into the river. If she floats, she's innocent. The water god Ea is rejecting her because she doesn't deserve death. If she sinks and drowns, she was guilty all along. You watch in horror as this young woman disappears beneath the muddy water, struggling against bonds that make swimming impossible. The crowd watches with the casual interest of people observing everyday entertainment. This isn't shocking to them. It's Tuesday morning in Babylon. But let's say she somehow survives, manages to surface, and make it to shore. Don't think that means she's free to go home and resume her life. Surviving trial by ordeal just means she's not guilty of this particular charge. She still faces social consequences that will make her life barely worth living. A woman who's been publicly accused of adultery, even if proven innocent, becomes unmarriageable, unemployable, and essentially a social pariah. Her own family might disown her to avoid the shame by association. And here's something that will really disturb your modern sensibilities. The accusation alone is often enough to trigger these consequences. Under the Code of Hammurabi, if a man even suspects his wife of adultery and makes the accusation publicly, she must undergo the ordeal regardless of evidence. There's no investigation, no attempt to determine if the suspicion has any basis in reality. The mere fact that her husband suspects her is enough to subject her to a trial that has roughly a 50% fatality rate. You're still processing what you've just witnessed when another commotion breaks out nearby. This time, it's a merchant accused of using false weights in his scales, essentially cheating customers in his transactions. In your world, this might result in fines, license revocation, or at worst, some jail time. In Babylon, commercial fraud is considered a form of theft. And theft penalties under Hammurabi's code are disproportionate. The merchant is forced to his knees in front of the crowd. A judge, identifiable by his ceremonial staff and elaborate robes, reads the charge in a voice that carries across the square. The punishment, according to Law 8 of the Code, is death. Not because the crime was particularly heinous, not because anyone was seriously harmed, but because maintaining commercial trust is essential to urban civilization, and the only way to ensure honesty is through terror. But here's where the code's brutal logic becomes apparent. They're not just executing him for his crime. They're making his death a public spectacle specifically to terrorize anyone else who might be considering similar offenses. The execution method chosen, and you're about to witness something that will haunt your dreams, is designed to be slow, public, and memorable. They bring out a bronze brazier filled with glowing coals. The merchant's hands, the tools of his crime, are going to be slowly burned off while he's still alive. The crowd doesn't gasp in horror. They press forward for a better view. Children are brought forward by their parents to watch, because witnessing public punishment is considered educational. You're watching a society that believes fear is the foundation of order, and they're very, very good at creating fear. As the merchant's screams echo across the square, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. People in the crowd are nodding in approval. They're not watching out of morbid curiosity. They genuinely believe this is appropriate, necessary, and just. This isn't a barbaric remnant that enlightened people tolerate. It's the core principle of their legal system, and they support it completely. The Code of Hammurabi contains 282 laws, and you're starting to realize that most of them involve punishments that would be considered torture by modern standards. Law 25. If someone steals during a fire, they're thrown into the fire. Law 153. If a woman kills her husband to be with another man, she's impaled on stakes. Law 195. If a son strikes his father, his hand is cut off. These aren't extreme punishments for extreme crimes. They're routine justice for routine offenses. But here's what makes the code truly terrifying from your perspective. It's not randomly cruel. It's systematically designed to reinforce social hierarchy through violence. The punishments aren't equal. They depend on the social status of both the perpetrator and the victim. If a nobleman kills a commoner, he pays a fine. If a commoner kills a nobleman, he dies. If a slave injures a free person, the penalty is much harsher than the reverse. Justice isn't blind in Babylon. It's explicitly biased in favor of wealth and status. You're beginning to understand that law in ancient Babylon isn't about protecting individual rights or ensuring fair treatment. It's about maintaining social order through systematic intimidation. The graphic public punishments aren't unfortunate necessities. They're the entire point. The law exists to make sure everyone knows exactly where they stand in the hierarchy and exactly what will happen if they step out of line. And here's the really disturbing part. By the standards of the ancient world, the Code of Hammurabi is progressive. It's one of the first legal systems to establish that punishment should fit the crime, that there should be consistent rules rather than arbitrary royal decrees. Other contemporary societies had even worse systems, or no formal legal systems at all. What you're witnessing isn't primitive barbarism. It's the cutting edge of Bronze Age jurisprudence. As you watch the merchant's punishment continue, you realize that you're not just observing ancient justice, you're participating in it. By standing in this crowd, by not speaking out, which would be suicide, by witnessing these punishments, you're becoming part of the system that maintains order through terror. And if you're caught breaking any law, no matter how minor, no matter how ignorant you are of local customs, this same crowd will gather to watch your punishment with the same casual approval. Welcome to a world where justice is public, punishment is entertainment, and mercy is a concept that hasn't been invented yet. Try not to accidentally break any of the 282 laws you've never heard of. Gods, temples, and human sacrifice. Your religious education begins you've survived your first encounter with Babylonian justice. But now you're about to face something even more alien to your modern mind. Religion, as it actually existed in the ancient world. Not the sanitized philosophical spirituality you might expect, but a system of beliefs and practices that revolves around appeasing cosmic forces through methods that would make horror movie directors take notes. You're about to discover that in Babylon, religion isn't a private matter of personal faith. It's a public system of controlled violence, designed to maintain the social order through divine terror. Your first real introduction to Babylonian religion comes when you hear drums echoing across the city. The sound is hypnotic, rhythmic, and somehow deeply unsettling. It's coming from the Esagila, the great temple of Marduk, Babylon's patron god. And something significant is happening there. The streets are filling with people moving toward the temple complex, their faces showing a mixture of devotion and fear that you don't quite understand yet. As you follow the crowd, you start to notice details that make your modern sensibilities recoil. Many of the people heading to the temple are carrying animals, lambs, goats, doves that are struggling against their bonds. The animals seem to sense what's coming in ways their human captors have learned to ignore. Blood is already staining the streets from animals that didn't survive the journey, and no one seems particularly concerned about the bodies being trampled underfoot. The Esagila temple complex, when you finally see it, is unlike any religious building from your experience. This isn't a place designed for quiet contemplation or peaceful worship. It's a massive industrial facility for processing divine communication, and that processing requires massive amounts of blood, pain, and death. The ziggurat towers above you like a mountain made by human hands. It's 7 levels representing the 7 heavens, each level requiring different types of offerings to different gods. You're swept into the temple courtyard by the crowd, and immediately you understand why people look afraid. The smell hits you first, not just incense and smoke, but the overwhelming stench of blood, burnt flesh, and human waste. The courtyard is filled with massive bronze altars, each one stained black with centuries of sacrificial offerings. Channels carved into the stone floor carry blood away from the altars, but the system can't keep up with the volume of daily sacrifice. The priests you see moving through this scene aren't the gentle spiritual guides you might expect from modern religion. These are men who've spent their entire lives learning to read divine will in the entrails of slaughtered animals, who've mastered the art of keeping victims alive as long as possible to maximize the offering's value, who've developed elaborate techniques for interpreting the patterns of spilled blood. They're wearing robes that are permanently stained with bodily fluids, and their hands are scarred from decades of handling sacrificial knives. But animal sacrifice, you quickly realize, is just the beginning. Today is apparently a festival day requiring special offerings, and special offerings mean human sacrifice. You watch in growing horror as a group of prisoners, criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war are led toward the main altar. They're not struggling because they've been drugged with some combination of opium and local plants that keep them conscious but compliant. They need to be aware of what's happening for the sacrifice to be effective, but they can't be allowed to fight or scream in ways that might displease the gods. The crowd around you isn't protesting or looking away. They're pushing forward for better views, because witnessing divine communication is considered a privilege and a blessing. Parents are lifting children onto their shoulders so they won't miss the sacred moment when human life is transformed into divine favor. This isn't barbarism or primitive ignorance. This is the sophisticated religious technology that keeps their civilization functioning. The first victim is a young man, probably a prisoner of war from one of Babylon's recent military campaigns. The high priest begins a lengthy incantation in Sumerian, the ancient sacred language that even most Babylonians don't understand. The words are supposed to explain to Marduk why this particular offering is being made, what the city needs in return, and how the gods should interpret the sacrifice. It's a formal negotiation between humans and cosmic forces, conducted in blood and pain. When the priest finally raises his bronze knife, You instinctively close your eyes, but the crowd around you gasps in a way that makes you look again. The killing isn't quick or merciful. The priest makes a careful incision in the victim's abdomen, reaching inside while the man is still alive to examine his organs. The color, texture, and positioning of the liver, kidneys, and heart will be read as divine messages about the future. The victim needs to remain conscious during this process because his awareness is part of the communication system. You're fighting not to vomit as you watch the priest pull out sections of the man's intestines, examining them in the sunlight while discussing their significance with other religious officials. The victim is still breathing, still aware, as his own organs are dissected and analyzed for divine meaning. This isn't cruel indifference to suffering. It's sophisticated theology that requires suffering to function properly. But here's what really disturbs your modern understanding. This system works, at least in the minds of the people practicing it. Babylon is the most powerful city in the known world. Its armies are victorious. Its trade networks span continents, and its citizens are generally prosperous by ancient standards. From their perspective, the gods are clearly satisfied with the sacrificial offerings, because divine favor is evident in material success. The human cost is just the price of civilization. The ceremony continues with additional victims, each one killed in slightly different ways to address different aspects of divine communication. A woman prisoner has her heart cut out while still beating, because questions about love and fertility require cardiac divination. An elderly slave is slowly strangled with silk cords, while priests examine the patterns of his death throes, because questions about time and aging require careful analysis of life leaving the body. Between the human sacrifices, temple servants move through the crowd collecting additional offerings, animals, grain, precious metals, and sometimes people. Citizens who want special divine favor can volunteer family members for sacrifice. This isn't forced or coerced. People actually compete for the honor of offering their relatives to the gods. You watch parents presenting their children, spouses offering each other, all eager to demonstrate their devotion through the ultimate gift. The religious logic is simple and terrifying. The gods created humans to serve them, and service sometimes requires death. Individual human lives have value only insofar as they contribute to divine satisfaction and social stability. Personal desires, individual rights, and human dignity are foreign concepts that would actually interfere with proper religious function. The community's relationship with the gods matters infinitely more than any individual's desire to stay alive. As the ceremony reaches its climax, you realize that you're not just witnessing ancient religion, you're participating in it. By standing in this crowd, by not fleeing or protesting, you're implicitly accepting the theological framework that makes mass human sacrifice not just acceptable, but necessary. Your presence is being interpreted as consent to the system, and that consent makes you complicit in everything you're watching. The ceremony ends with priests distributing small portions of sacrificial meat to the crowd. Eating flesh from sacrificial victims creates a communion between humans and gods, binding the community together through shared consumption of sacred violence. You're expected to participate, and refusing would mark you as either sacrilegious or foreign. Both dangerous categories in a city where religious conformity is essential for survival. As you mechanically chew the small piece of human flesh handed to you, trying not to think about where it came from, you realize that you've just crossed a line that seemed impossible to cross. You're no longer an observer of ancient barbarity. You're a participant in religious practices that your modern mind categorizes as pure evil. But the people around you, including the victim's own relatives, see this as the highest form of spiritual communion. Welcome to religion in ancient Babylon, where the gods demand blood, faith requires death, and spiritual enlightenment comes through systematic dehumanization. Try not to let the theological implications keep you awake tonight, assuming you survive long enough to see another sunset. The marketplace of nightmares, economics at the edge of survival, You've somehow managed to survive your first religious ceremony without losing your sanity completely. But now you need to confront a more immediate problem: acquiring the basic necessities for survival in an economic system that operates on principles your modern mind finds almost incomprehensible. You need food, shelter, and clothing. But obtaining these things in ancient Babylon requires navigating a marketplace where human lives are commodities, where debt slavery is routine, and where the line between legitimate commerce and outright robbery is often indistinguishable. The Great Bazaar of Babylon stretches for miles through the city center, a maze of narrow alleys and crowded stalls, where merchants from across the known world come to trade everything from Chinese silk to African gold. But this isn't the romantic marketplace of adventure movies. It's a pressure cooker of human desperation, where fortunes are made and lost on the turn of a conversation, where the wrong negotiation can result in slavery or death, and where your complete ignorance of local customs marks you as prey for every experienced predator in the commercial ecosystem. Your first challenge is understanding the currency system, which is far more complex than simple metal coins. Babylon operates on a mixed economy involving silver by weight, barley as a standard measure, and an intricate system of credit and debt that requires mathematical knowledge you don't possess. The merchants can calculate complex exchange rates in their heads, converting between different measurement systems, accounting for seasonal price variations, and factoring in credit terms that span multiple years. You can't even figure out how much water costs, let alone negotiate for food. You approach a grain merchant, hoping to buy some barley bread, but immediately realize you've made a critical error. The merchant takes one look at your foreign clothes, listens to your pathetic attempt to communicate in broken Akkadian, and his eyes light up with the unmistakable gleam of someone who spotted an easy mark. He starts speaking rapidly, gesturing at his grain while calling to other merchants nearby. You don't understand the words, but the tone is unmistakable. He's alerting others that a wealthy but stupid foreigner has just walked into their trap. Within minutes, you're surrounded by merchants all eager to help you with your shopping needs. They're not being friendly. They're coordinating a systematic, fleecing operation that they've clearly executed many times before. One merchant offers to sell you a small loaf of bread for what you later realize is about 10 times the normal price. Another offers to exchange your foreign clothes for more appropriate local garments, but the trade terms would leave you nearly naked. A third merchant offers to provide translation services for all your purchases, for a fee that would consume most of whatever wealth you might possess. But here's where the situation turns truly dangerous. They're not just trying to overcharge you. They're evaluating whether you're valuable enough to kidnap and sell into slavery. Slave trading is a legitimate business in Babylon, and foreigners with no local connections are prime targets for merchants who specialize in human trafficking. The way they're examining your teeth, feeling the quality of your clothes, and assessing your general health suggests they're calculating your potential value on the slave market. You try to back away from the crowd of merchants, but you quickly discover that leaving isn't as simple as walking away. In Babylonian commercial culture, beginning a negotiation creates certain social obligations. Walking away without completing a transaction is considered deeply insulting, and insulting merchants in their own marketplace can result in mob violence. You're trapped in a commercial interaction that you don't understand, with people who view you as either a source of profit or a threat to their livelihood. The grain merchant starts explaining, through gestures and the few words of other languages he knows, that he requires payment in advance, plus a deposit to ensure the grain's quality, plus an additional fee for the privilege of buying from an established merchant. The total cost he's demanding for a single loaf of bread would be enough to feed a local family for a week. When you try to negotiate, he becomes agitated and starts shouting in Akkadian, attracting more attention from other merchants and passers-by. Now you're drawing a crowd, and crowds in ancient marketplaces are dangerous things. Commerce in Babylon isn't regulated by government oversight or consumer protection. Laws. It's governed by social pressure and mob justice. If the merchants convince the crowd that you're trying to cheat them, or that you're showing disrespect for local customs, the situation can turn violent very quickly. You've seen what Babylonian mob justice looks like, and you have no desire to experience it firsthand. A textile merchant offers to resolve the situation by accepting your foreign clothes as payment for both the bread and a set of local garments. This seems like a reasonable solution until you realize that the clothes he's offering in exchange are the type worn by slaves. The cut, color, and quality immediately identify the wearer as property rather than a free citizen. Putting on those clothes would solve your immediate problem of looking foreign, but it would create the much worse problem of looking like escaped property. Meanwhile, a money changer has appeared, offering to convert whatever foreign currency you might have into local silver. His exchange rates are obviously predatory, but more importantly, he's asking to examine any valuables you possess. In a marketplace, where information is currency, showing your resources to one merchant means every criminal in the area will know exactly what you're carrying within the hour. Robbery in ancient Babylon isn't random street crime. It's carefully planned. Business operations based on detailed intelligence. As you're trying to figure out how to escape this commercial nightmare, you notice something that makes your situation even worse. Children are watching you with intense interest. These aren't innocent kids playing in the marketplace. They're professional thieves, pickpockets, and information gatherers who work for various criminal organizations. They've been studying your behavior, cataloging your possessions, and reporting your movements to adults who specialize in robbing or enslaving foreigners. The economic reality of ancient Babylon is that most people live constantly on the edge of disaster. A bad harvest, a failed business deal, or an unexpected expense can push entire families into debt slavery. The merchants you're dealing with aren't evil. They're desperate people trying to extract enough profit from each transaction to keep their own families fed and housed. Your obvious vulnerability represents an opportunity for economic advancement that they simply can't afford to ignore. But let's say you somehow manage to complete a transaction and acquire some food. The bread you receive isn't the clean, processed product you're used to. It's dense, coarse stuff made from grain that includes significant amounts of sand, insects, and mouse droppings. The water available for purchase has been stored in containers that haven't been properly cleaned, and a taste of mold, algae, and things you prefer not to identify. This is considered normal food quality, and complaining about it would mark you as ridiculously finicky. The meat available in the marketplace presents even greater challenges. It's not refrigerated, obviously, and food safety regulations don't exist. You can see flies laying eggs on cuts of lamb, and vendors casually brush off maggots before weighing portions for customers. Customers don't seem bothered by this because their digestive systems have adapted to handle bacterial loads that would hospitalize you. Eating this meat would almost certainly make you violently ill, but refusing to eat it would mean starving. Even if you manage to acquire food, finding safe storage for it presents another set of problems. You have no home, no secure location, and no understanding of local preservation methods. Food spoils quickly in Babylon's heat, and storing it improperly attracts rats, insects, and thieves. Other people in your situation, foreigners without resources or connections, often band together for mutual protection. But joining these groups means accepting their leadership, following their rules, and participating in whatever schemes they use to survive. As evening approaches and the marketplace begins to close, you realize that you've spent an entire day learning about commerce and acquired almost nothing of value. You're hungrier, more exhausted, and significantly poorer than when you started. The merchants are packing up their goods, but they're not forgetting about you. Word of the wealthy but incompetent foreigner has spread through their commercial network, and tomorrow they'll be ready for you with even more sophisticated schemes to separate you from anything of value you might possess. Welcome to free market capitalism in its purest form, where government regulation doesn't exist Consumer protection is a foreign concept, and economic survival depends entirely on your ability to outnegotiate people who've spent their entire lives perfecting the art of extracting profit from human desperation. Try not to get sold into slavery before morning. Social hierarchy and human property. Learning your place in hell. You've survived another day in the Babylonian marketplace without being enslaved or murdered, which puts you ahead of many foreign visitors. But now you need to understand something that will determine every aspect of your existence in the city. Social hierarchy isn't just a cultural preference in ancient Babylon. It's the fundamental organizing principle that determines whether you live or die, eat or starve, receive protection or become a victim. And based on your current status as a foreign nobody with no connections, you're about to discover that your position in this hierarchy is somewhere between livestock and property. Babylonian society operates on three basic levels: the Amelu, free noble citizens; the Mashkenu, commoners and artisans; and the Wardu, slaves. These aren't just social categories. They're legal classifications that determine your rights, protections, and punishments under the Code of Hammurabi. What makes this system particularly brutal is that your classification isn't fixed at birth. Free people can be enslaved for debt, crime, or simple bad luck, while slaves can occasionally earn or buy freedom. It's a fluid system of human classification, which means everyone lives with the constant fear of losing status. As a foreigner with no local connections, you don't fit neatly into any of these categories, which puts you in extreme danger. You're not protected by the rights of citizenship. You don't have the clearly defined role of a slave, and you lack the family connections that provide security to most commoners. You exist in a legal gray area that makes you vulnerable to exploitation by anyone with higher social status, which, at this point, includes almost everyone in the city. Your first real lesson in Babylonian social hierarchy comes when you accidentally make eye contact with a nobleman in the street. He's easily identifiable by his elaborate robes, carefully groomed beard, and the gold jewelry that proclaims his wealth and status. In your culture, eye contact is normal, even polite. In Babylon, a person of your low status looking directly at a nobleman is considered deeply insulting, almost like a physical assault on his dignity and social position. The nobleman stops walking and stares at you with the kind of controlled fury that suggests violence is imminent. He begins speaking in rapid Akkadian, his voice rising with each word. You don't understand the language, but his gestures make his meaning clear. You've committed a serious breach of social etiquette, and he's demanding some form of satisfaction. Other people in the street stop to watch, but none of them show sympathy for your obvious confusion. From their perspective, ignorance of proper social behavior is no excuse for disrespecting your betters. A crowd begins to gather, and you quickly realize that this isn't going to be resolved with a simple apology. Social hierarchy in Babylon is maintained through public enforcement, and letting a low-status person disrespect a nobleman without consequences would undermine the entire system. The crowd expects to see your inferior status reinforced through humiliation, physical punishment, or both. They're not cruel spectators. They're citizens participating in the social mechanism that keeps their civilization stable. The nobleman pulls out a leather whip from his belt, not because he was planning to beat someone today, but because carrying instruments of punishment is part of his social status. Free citizens, particularly nobles, have the right to physically discipline people of lower status who show disrespect. This isn't considered assault, it's considered education. You're about to receive a very painful lesson in proper social behavior, and everyone watching considers this both necessary and appropriate. The first lash across your back drops you to your knees, more from shock than pain. You've never experienced deliberate violence from another human being, and your nervous system doesn't know how to process the sensation. The second lash brings real pain, the kind that makes thinking clearly impossible. By the third lash, you're learning what every low-status person in Babylon knows. Physical punishment isn't just about deterring future misbehavior. It's about reinforcing the psychological reality of social hierarchy. But here's what makes the beating particularly brutal. The crowd is enjoying it. Not in a sadistic way, but with the satisfied approval of people watching social order being properly maintained. A few spectators offer helpful advice to the nobleman about how to make the punishment more effective. Parents point out the scene to their children as an educational example. This isn't cruelty, it's social maintenance, and everyone benefits from seeing the hierarchy properly enforced. When the beating finally stops, you're lying in the street, bleeding and barely conscious. The nobleman delivers a final lecture in Akkadian that you don't understand, but his tone makes it clear that this was just a mild correction for a minor offense. If you make the same mistake again, the consequences will be much worse. He walks away, and the crowd disperses, leaving you to deal with your injuries alone. As you struggle to stand up, a man approaches you, not to offer help, but to make you an offer. He's a slave dealer, and he's been watching the entire encounter with professional interest. In his estimation, you're clearly foreign, obviously without protection, and now publicly marked as someone of very low status. He offers to buy you from yourself, which sounds insane until he explains the logic. By agreeing to indenture yourself to him, you would gain the legal protection that comes with being property. Slaves in Babylon have clearly defined rights and protections under the law. They can't be arbitrarily killed. They must be fed and housed by their owners, and they have legal recourse if mistreated. Free people without status or connections have none of these protections. Paradoxically, becoming a slave might actually improve your situation. The slave dealer explains his offer in broken versions of several languages, trying to find one you understand. He'll provide food, shelter, and protection in exchange for your labor and complete obedience. The contract would be for 7 years, after which you'd be free to leave or renegotiate terms. Given your current alternatives, starvation, continued beatings, or worse, it's actually a reasonable offer by local standards. But accepting would mean acknowledging that you're property, subject to being bought, sold, or traded at your owner's discretion. You'd have no control over where you live, what work you do, or how you spend your time. Your owner could beat you for any reason or no reason, as long as he didn't permanently disable you. You could be sold to someone else without notice or consent. Most disturbingly, you could be offered as collateral for business loans, meaning your freedom would depend on other people's financial decisions. While you're considering this horrible choice, another man approaches with a different offer. He's a pimp who specializes in foreign prostitutes, and he's interested in adding you to his stable of workers. The sex trade in Babylon isn't hidden or stigmatized. It's a legitimate business, regulated by the same laws that govern other commercial activities. Temple prostitution is actually considered sacred, and secular prostitution is viewed as providing necessary social services. His offer is slightly better than slavery in some ways. You'd retain legal status as a free person and keep a small percentage of your earnings. But it's worse in other ways. The work is dangerous, the customers are often violent, and the social stigma would make it almost impossible to transition to any other occupation. Once you're identified as a prostitute, that becomes your permanent social category with all the limitations and dangers that implies. As you're weighing these grotesque options, you notice that other people of obviously low status are watching you with interest. They're not offering help. They're calculating whether you might be useful to their own survival schemes. Groups of foreigners, escaped slaves, discharged soldiers, and social outcasts band together for mutual protection. But joining these groups means participating in whatever activities they use to survive. Theft, fraud, violence, and worse are routine necessities for people outside the normal social hierarchy. The reality of Babylonian social hierarchy is that it's not just a class system, it's a survival mechanism. People who fit clearly into established categories have protection, rights, and social support networks. People who don't fit into these categories are essentially outside the bounds of civilization, subject to violence, exploitation, and abandonment without legal recourse. Your modern concepts of individual rights, equal treatment, and social mobility don't just not exist here. They would be considered dangerous threats to social stability. As darkness falls and you still haven't made a decision about which horrible option to choose, you realize that you're learning something profound about human civilization. Social hierarchy isn't an unfortunate side effect of complex societies. It's one of the fundamental technologies that makes complex societies possible. The brutality you've experienced isn't a bug in the Babylonian system. It's a feature that keeps the whole structure functioning. Welcome to your education in social stratification, where your value as a human being is determined entirely by your usefulness to people with higher status, and where dignity is a luxury that only the powerful can afford. Try to make your choice about slavery, prostitution, or criminal gangs before morning. The longer you wait, the fewer options you'll have. Medicine, disease, and the art of dying slowly. You've somehow managed to survive your first encounters with Babylonian justice, religion, commerce, and social hierarchy. But now you're about to face perhaps the most terrifying aspect of ancient urban life. Getting sick or injured in a world where medical knowledge consists mainly of superstition, prayer, and procedures that are more likely to kill you than cure you. Your body, already weakened by contaminated food, polluted water, and constant stress, is about to confront a disease environment that would challenge even the most robust ancient constitution. The beating you received yesterday has left you with injuries that, in your modern world, would require immediate medical attention. Your back is lacerated, you're developing signs of infection, and you're experiencing pain that makes moving difficult. In 21st century terms, you need antibiotics, proper wound cleaning, and probably some form of pain management. In ancient Babylon, you have access to temple medicine, folk remedies, and surgical procedures that are more likely to kill you than help you recover. Your first introduction to Babylonian medicine comes when a street vendor notices you favoring your injured back. He offers to sell you a healing poultice made from herbs, animal fat, and what he claims are sacred ingredients blessed by temple priests. The mixture looks like something scraped from a stable floor, smells worse, and costs more than you can afford. But desperate pain makes people willing to try desperate remedies, and you're starting to understand why ancient people were so vulnerable to medical charlatans. The vendor explains, through gestures and broken phrases in multiple languages, that your injuries are caused by an imbalance of bodily humors aggravated by spiritual contamination from angering the gods. The solution involves applying his poultice, reciting specific prayers to Ninkarek, the goddess of healing, and avoiding certain foods that might worsen the spiritual contamination. This isn't ignorance. It's sophisticated medical theory by ancient standards, based on centuries of observation and philosophical reasoning. When you express skepticism about the spiritual component of your medical treatment, the vendor becomes genuinely concerned for your welfare. From his perspective, treating physical symptoms without addressing their spiritual causes is not just ineffective, it's dangerous. Illnesses are often caused by divine punishment, demonic possession, or magical curses. And treating them purely as physical problems can actually make them worse by ignoring their supernatural dimensions. But let's say you decide to seek more professional medical care. Babylon has physician priests who train for years in medical theory and practice, learning to read diagnostic omens, prepare complex herbal remedies, and perform surgical procedures. These aren't primitive witch doctors. They're highly educated specialists who combine empirical observation with sophisticated theoretical frameworks. The problem is that their theoretical frameworks are based on assumptions about human anatomy, disease causation, and treatment effectiveness that are almost completely wrong. You make your way to the Temple of Ninkarek, where priest-physicians offer medical services to those who can afford them. The temple complex includes areas specifically designed for medical treatment, with facilities for surgery, rooms for preparing medicines, and spaces for the ritual purification that must accompany all healing procedures. The priests you encounter are clearly intelligent, dedicated professionals who genuinely want to help their patients. They're also working with medical knowledge that would be considered malpractice in any modern context. The diagnostic process begins with an examination of your injuries, but it's not the kind of examination you're expecting. The priest-physician looks at the wounds, but he's more interested in their symbolic significance than their medical severity. The location, pattern, and appearance of your injuries tell him about the spiritual causes of your condition. He examines your urine, not for signs of infection or metabolic problems, but for omens about divine favor or disfavor. The priest consults various diagnostic texts written on clay tablets, complex charts that correlate physical symptoms with astronomical phenomena, seasonal patterns, and religious observances. Your treatment will be determined by factors like the day of the week you were injured, the phase of the moon, your birth date, and whether you've recently participated in religious ceremonies. This isn't superstition overlaying medical care. Superstition is the medical care. After extensive consultation and calculation, the priest-physician prescribes a treatment regimen that combines herbal medicines, ritual purification, and minor surgery. The herbal component actually shows some sophisticated understanding of pharmacology. Willow bark for pain relief, honey for wound care, various plant extracts with genuine antimicrobial properties. The problem is that these effective ingredients are mixed with substances that range from useless to actively harmful. Your prescribed medicine includes powdered human skull for spiritual strength, dried bat wings to ward off demons, and mercury preparations, which are slowly poisoning you while supposedly balancing your bodily humors. The effective herbs might actually help you recover, but the toxic additives could kill you in the process. Ancient medicine often worked despite itself, not because of its theoretical sophistication. The surgical component of your treatment involves cleaning your wounds with wine and honey, actually quite effective antiseptics, followed by procedures that demonstrate both remarkable skill and terrifying ignorance. The priest-physician uses bronze instruments that are sharp and precisely made, and his manual dexterity is impressive. But he's also working without any understanding of infection, blood loss, or shock management. The priest makes several deep incisions in your back, not to repair damaged tissue, but to release evil spirits that might be trapped in your wounds. The cutting is precise and deliberate, based on detailed anatomical charts that show the spiritual geography of the human body. From his perspective, he's performing sophisticated spiritual surgery to address the supernatural aspects of your condition. From your perspective, he's making your injuries worse while dramatically increasing your risk of fatal infection. The procedure is conducted with elaborate ritual accompaniment, incense burning, prayers being chanted, sacred symbols being drawn in your blood. This isn't decoration added to medical treatment. The ritual is part of the medical treatment. The gods need to be properly petitioned, demons need to be formally banished, and spiritual forces need to be aligned correctly for physical healing to occur. Treating your body without treating your soul would be considered incomplete medicine. As the priest works on your wounds, you notice other patients in the temple receiving various forms of medical care. A woman with a difficult pregnancy is having her belly painted with magical symbols while priests chant over her. A man with what looks like severe mental illness is being beaten with sacred branches to drive out the demons causing his condition. A child with obvious malnutrition is receiving dietary restrictions designed to appease the gods rather than improve nutrition. What strikes you most forcefully is that everyone, patients, priests, family members, genuinely believes in the effectiveness of these treatments. They're not desperately clinging to false hope. They're confident in a medical system that regularly produces results they consider successful. When patients die, it's because the spiritual contamination was too severe or the treatment wasn't started soon enough. When patients recover, it proves the effectiveness of temple medicine. The priest finishes your surgical treatment and provides detailed instructions for follow-up care. You must return to the temple daily for ritual purification. Avoid certain foods that might interfere with spiritual healing, and abstain from activities that could invite further divine punishment. Most importantly, you must make appropriate offerings to ensure the gods' continued favor during your recovery period. As you leave the temple, your wounds properly cleaned, but now bearing additional incisions, medicated with a mixture of helpful and toxic substances, and accompanied by spiritual obligations that will dominate your daily routine. You realize that you've just experienced medicine as it existed for most of human history. The priest-physician was skilled, caring, and working within the most advanced medical framework available to his civilization. He may have helped you, harmed you, or both, and there's no way to know which until you either recover or die. Welcome to healthcare in ancient Babylon, where medicine and religion are inseparable, where treatment effectiveness is measured by divine favor rather than clinical outcomes, and where surviving the cure is often as challenging as surviving the disease. Try not to develop any additional medical problems. The treatments might literally kill you. Crime and punishment. When justice becomes public entertainment, you've survived your first experience with Babylonian medicine and somehow avoided dying from either your original injuries or the treatment designed to cure them. But now you're about to witness something that will fundamentally change your understanding of crime, punishment, and human nature itself. You're about to see how a civilization maintains order not through rehabilitation, deterrence, or protection of individual rights, but through systematic public brutality designed to terrify potential criminals into submission. What you're about to witness will make modern prison systems look humane by comparison. Your introduction to Babylonian criminal justice begins when you're awakened by screams echoing through the city streets. These aren't the screams of people in accident or sudden distress. These are the deliberate, prolonged screams of people being systematically tortured in public spaces designed specifically for that purpose. It's early morning, the optimal time for public punishments, because the maximum number of people can witness them before beginning their daily work. You follow the sound toward the city's main execution ground, a large open space near the palace complex where serious criminal punishments are carried out. What you find there challenges every assumption you've ever made about justice, human dignity, and civilized behavior. This isn't a prison or courthouse. It's a carefully designed theater for transforming human suffering into social control. And the performance is already in progress. The first thing that strikes you is how organized and systematic everything is. This isn't mob violence or impulsive brutality. It's carefully planned, professionally executed, and socially sanctioned punishment carried out by trained specialists. The executioners are skilled craftsmen who've spent years learning to maximize pain, while keeping victims conscious as long as possible. The crowd management is sophisticated, with viewing areas arranged to ensure maximum public impact. Even the timing is calculated to provide the greatest educational value to the largest number of witnesses. The current victim is a man convicted of adultery with a nobleman's wife. Under the Code of Hammurabi, this crime carries a death penalty. But the method of execution is designed to serve multiple social functions beyond simply ending the man's life. He's been stripped naked and tied to a wooden framework that holds him upright while allowing access to all parts of his body. His execution will take most of the day, and every moment will be carefully orchestrated to reinforce social messages about sexual propriety, respect for social hierarchy, and the consequences of challenging established authority. The executioner begins by making small, precise cuts across the victim's body, not deep enough to cause rapid death, but sufficient to produce significant pain and visible bleeding. Each cut is placed according to traditional patterns that correspond to specific crimes. Adultery requires cuts in particular locations that symbolically represent the corruption of sexual purity. The crowd watches with intense attention, because understanding the symbolic language of punishment is considered important civic knowledge. Between cutting sessions, A town crier reads the victim's crimes aloud, explaining how his actions threatened social stability and offended divine order. This isn't just punishment, it's public education. The crowd is learning exactly which behaviors are forbidden, exactly what consequences await those who violate social norms, and exactly how the community responds to threats against its moral order. Children are encouraged to watch and ask questions, because witnessing punishment is considered essential to their moral education. But what truly disturbs your modern sensibilities is the crowd's reaction. They're not watching in horrified silence or looking away in disgust. They're actively participating in the punishment through cheers, commentary, and suggestions for the executioner. When the victim screams particularly loudly, the crowd responds with approval. When he begs for mercy, they mock his weakness. This isn't bloodthirsty savagery. It's community. Participation in the maintenance of social order through collective violence. A second victim is brought out, a woman convicted of stealing grain from her employer. Her punishment is different from the adulterers because her crime was economic rather than sexual, but it's no less brutal. She's to be slowly suffocated using a method that allows her to continue speaking until nearly the end, because part of her punishment involves publicly confessing her crimes and warning others against similar behavior. The executioner places a leather hood over her head, progressively tightening it to restrict her breathing while keeping her conscious. Between tightening sessions, he removes the hood and encourages her to speak to the crowd about her crimes. She's expected to explain why she stole, express remorse for her actions, and provide moral instruction to the audience about the importance of honesty and respect for property. Her own dying words become part of the punishment's educational value. What makes this scene particularly horrifying is the woman's cooperation with her own execution. She's not fighting or protesting. She's playing her assigned role in the social drama of punishment, speaking her lines clearly and expressing appropriate remorse for her crimes. This isn't because she's been broken by torture. It's because she genuinely believes that public execution is the appropriate consequence for her actions, and that her death will serve important social purposes. The crowd listens respectfully to her confessions and moral instructions, occasionally calling out questions or comments. Parents translate her words for young children, using her statements as teaching moments about property rights and social responsibility. Her death isn't just punishment. It's community education, moral instruction, and social bonding all rolled into one carefully orchestrated public event. Throughout the morning, additional criminals are brought out for punishment. A man caught cheating in business transactions has his hands slowly crushed with bronze implements because the hands were the instruments of his crime. A woman who showed disrespect to her husband's family is having her tongue cut out in progressive stages because the tongue was the instrument of her offense. A teenager caught stealing has his fingers broken individually because young people require especially clear moral instruction. Each punishment follows traditional patterns that everyone in the crowd understands. The symbolism isn't random. It's a sophisticated system for communicating social values through controlled violence. The location of injuries, the duration of suffering, and the method of death all carry specific meanings that reinforce community understanding of proper behavior. This is justice as social communication, using human bodies as the medium for transmitting cultural information. Between individual punishments, professional entertainers move through the crowd selling food, drinks, and small trinkets. Public executions are social events that bring the community together, and vendors take advantage of the captive audience to conduct business. Children play games nearby, their laughter mixing with the screams of dying criminals in a juxtaposition that perfectly captures the casual acceptance of violence in ancient urban life. What gradually becomes clear is that these punishments aren't primarily about deterring crime. They're about maintaining social cohesion through shared participation in sanctioned violence. The community bonds together by collectively witnessing and approving the destruction of people who violated social norms. The brutality isn't an unfortunate side effect of primitive justice. It's the main point. Terror is the technology that keeps complex urban societies stable in the absence of modern police, courts, and prisons. As the day progresses and more criminals are tortured to death, you notice that the crowd never gets bored or disgusted. If anything, they become more engaged as the executions continue, calling out encouragement to the executioners and discussing the moral lessons being demonstrated. This isn't abnormal behavior that civilized people barely tolerate. It's normal behavior that civilized people enthusiastically support. The final execution of the day is reserved for the most serious offense, a slave who killed his master. This crime threatens the fundamental social order, so the punishment must be proportionally severe. The slave will be crucified, but not in the relatively quick method later associated with Roman executions. Babylonian crucifixion is designed to keep victims alive for days, while displaying them publicly as warnings to other potential rebels. As workers begin constructing the crucifixion apparatus, you realize that you spent an entire day watching your fellow humans being systematically tortured to death for the entertainment and education of a cheering crowd. More disturbing still, you've begun to understand the social logic behind what you're witnessing. In a world without modern law enforcement, public brutality serves essential civilizational functions that keep urban societies from collapsing into chaos. Welcome to criminal justice in ancient Babylon, where punishment is entertainment, torture is education, and the screams of the dying are considered the sound of social order being properly maintained. Try not to commit any crimes. The punishment really is worse than death. Politics and war, the machinery of power in motion. You've survived witnessing a day of public executions without losing your sanity completely. But now you're about to encounter something even more dangerous to your long-term survival: the Babylonian politics in action. In a world where political power comes from the ability to organize violence, where diplomatic negotiations are backed by the threat of mass slaughter, and where your personal survival depends entirely on correctly predicting which faction will dominate the next power struggle, ignorance of political realities isn't just inconvenient, it's fatal. Your first introduction to Babylonian high politics comes when trumpet blasts echo across the city, followed by the sound of thousands of marching feet. King Nebuchadnezzar II is returning from a military campaign, and the entire city is turning out to witness his triumphal procession. This isn't just a parade celebrating military victory. It's a carefully orchestrated display of power designed to reinforce the king's authority, intimidate potential enemies, and demonstrate Babylon's dominance over the known world. From your position in the crowd, you can see the procession approaching through clouds of dust kicked up by marching soldiers. The organization is impressive and terrifying. Thousands of warriors moving in perfect formation, their bronze weapons glinting in the sunlight, their uniforms marking them as professional soldiers rather than civilian conscripts. This is what military power looked like in the ancient world. Not just the ability to fight, but the ability to coordinate massive numbers of trained killers for strategic purposes. The procession begins with captured enemy soldiers, thousands of them chained together and forced to march naked through the streets. These aren't just prisoners of war. They're living symbols of Babylon's military superiority. Human trophies displayed to demonstrate what happens to anyone who opposes the king's will. Many of them are wounded, some are barely alive, and all of them serve as walking advertisements for the consequences of political resistance. The crowd's reaction to these prisoners reveals something crucial about political participation in ancient Babylon. Citizenship includes the right to humiliate defeated enemies. People throw garbage, spit, and shout insults at the prisoners. But this isn't random cruelty. It's organized political theater. By participating in the humiliation of Babylon's enemies, ordinary citizens demonstrate their loyalty to the king and their commitment to the social order he represents. Behind the prisoners come wagons loaded with plunder from the conquered territories. Gold, silver, precious stones, exotic animals, and luxury goods that will enrich the king's treasury and reward his supporters. This wealth isn't just economic gain. It's proof of divine favor. In Babylonian political theory, military success demonstrates that the gods support the king's rule, which legitimizes his authority and justifies continued obedience from his subjects. But the most politically significant part of the procession comes next. Captured foreign nobles and priests forced to walk in chains behind the treasure wagons. These aren't just high-value prisoners. They're symbols of conquered political systems. By displaying enemy rulers as defeated captives, the king demonstrates that no earthly power can resist Babylon's supremacy. The message is clear: submit voluntarily or be destroyed completely. The king himself appears near the end of the procession, riding in an elaborate chariot surrounded by his personal guard. He's not just a military commander or political leader. He's a semi-divine figure whose authority comes directly from the gods. The crowd doesn't just cheer for his victories. They prostrate themselves before his presence, because looking directly at the king without permission is considered sacrilege. You quickly follow their example, dropping to your face in the street to avoid accidentally committing treason. From your position pressed against the ground, you can hear the king addressing the crowd in formal Akkadian, probably recounting his military victories and promising continued prosperity for loyal citizens. You can't understand the words, but the crowd's responses, cheers, ritual chanting, repeated acclamations, suggest this is as much religious ceremony as political event. The king isn't just reporting on military success. He's renewing the sacred contract between ruler and subjects. After the procession passes, you notice that the political atmosphere in the city has changed dramatically. People are openly discussing military campaigns, speculating about future conquests, and arguing about the implications of the king's victories for Babylon's internal politics. War, you quickly realize, isn't just an external activity. It's the foundation of domestic political stability. Military success legitimizes the king's authority, provides wealth for reward systems, and creates external threats that justify internal social control. But you also notice more subtle political dynamics at work. Different groups within the crowd responded differently to various parts of the procession, suggesting complex factional loyalties that aren't immediately apparent. Some people cheered more enthusiastically for certain military units. Others showed particular interest in specific types of plunder. And a few seemed to be taking careful note of which nobles and priests were prominent in the king's entourage. Your crash course in Babylonian political reality continues when you overhear a conversation between two merchants discussing the implications of the king's latest conquests for their business interests. They're not just talking about trade opportunities. They're calculating how the redistribution of conquered wealth will affect their relationships with various court officials, temple administrators, and military commanders who control access to profitable contracts. Political power in Babylon, you begin to understand, operates through a complex network of personal relationships, mutual obligations, and carefully calculated exchanges of favors. The king may be the ultimate authority, but his power is exercised through subordinates who have their own interests, ambitions, and power networks. Navigating this system requires detailed knowledge of who owes what to whom, which alliances are strong or weak, and how recent military victories have shifted the balance of influence among competing factions. The conversation between the merchants reveals another crucial aspect of Babylonian politics. Information is currency, and access to reliable information determines business success or failure. They're discussing rumors about planned military campaigns, speculation about succession politics within the royal family, and intelligence about economic policies being debated in the palace. This information directly affects their ability to make profitable business decisions, which means political intelligence is quite literally a matter of economic survival. As evening approaches, you follow crowds of people moving toward the palace complex for the public festivities celebrating the king's return. These aren't just parties. They're political events designed to reinforce social bonds, demonstrate loyalty, and provide opportunities for advancement within the power system. Attendance isn't optional for anyone who wants to maintain their position in Babylonian society, and the way people behave at these events directly affects their future prospects. The palace complex, when you finally see it, is designed to overwhelm visitors with displays of wealth and power. Massive gates decorated with glazed brick reliefs, enormous courtyards filled with exotic plants and animals, buildings that dwarf anything in the rest of the city. Everything is calculated to remind visitors that the king possesses resources beyond imagination. This isn't just architectural magnificence. It's political propaganda rendered in stone and bronze. Inside the complex, you witness political theater on a scale you couldn't have imagined. Foreign ambassadors present tribute from distant kingdoms. Nobles compete to offer the most impressive gifts to celebrate the king's victories. And priests perform elaborate ceremonies to demonstrate divine approval of royal policies. Every interaction follows precise protocols that reinforce hierarchical relationships and demonstrate proper respect for authority. But you also notice the constant undercurrent of tension that characterizes palace politics. Conversations stop when certain people approach. Alliances shift based on who's currently in royal favor. Ambitious officials maneuver carefully to advance their interests without appearing disloyal to the king. Political advancement requires a combination of competence, loyalty, ruthlessness, and luck that few people successfully navigate for extended periods. As the celebration continues deep into the night, you begin to understand that politics in ancient Babylon isn't just about governing territory or managing economic resources. It's about organizing and directing human violence on a massive scale. The king's power ultimately depends on his ability to convince thousands of professional soldiers to kill and die on his command. And everything else in the political system serves that fundamental requirement. Welcome to politics in ancient Babylon, where power grows out of the ability to organize mass violence, where loyalty is purchased with plunder from conquered enemies, and where your survival depends on correctly predicting which faction will still be alive tomorrow morning. Try not to accidentally commit treason while you're learning the local political landscape. Death, afterlife, and the final journey home, you've somehow survived longer in ancient Babylon than most foreign visitors manage. But now you're about to confront the aspect of ancient life that puts all your previous experiences into perspective. Death isn't just an individual biological event here. It's a complex social, religious, and economic process that affects entire families and communities for generations. What you're about to learn about mortality in the ancient world will make you understand why people were so afraid of dying, that they were willing to endure almost any suffering to postpone their final journey to the underworld. Your education in Babylonian attitudes toward death begins when you witness a funeral procession passing through the streets. This isn't the quiet, dignified affair you might expect from modern funeral practices. It's a chaotic explosion of grief, terror, and desperation that involves not just the deceased's family, but potentially hundreds of community members. The wailing you hear isn't just emotional expression. It's a desperate attempt to ensure the dead person's spirit receives proper guidance for the journey to the underworld. The deceased is a wealthy merchant, and his body is being carried through the city on an elaborate platform decorated with precious metals, exotic fabrics, and symbols of his earthly accomplishments. But what makes this procession particularly disturbing is the number of living people who will accompany him into death. His wife, several servants, his favorite horse, and a number of other individuals are walking alongside the platform, drugged with opium and sacred herbs, but still conscious enough to understand what's about to happen to them. Human sacrifice at funerals isn't considered barbaric or primitive in Babylonian culture. It's considered essential for ensuring the deceased's comfort and status in the afterlife. The dead person needs servants in the underworld, needs companions for the journey, and needs evidence of their earthly importance to present to the gods of death. The people walking to their deaths alongside the merchant's body aren't victims. They're fulfilling sacred obligations that will benefit their master in the next world. The procession stops at the city's main cemetery, a vast complex of underground chambers, brick tombs, and ritual spaces that represents one of humanity's first attempts to organize death on an urban scale. A cemetery isn't just a burial ground. It's a complex religious institution, where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead is carefully managed through elaborate rituals, ongoing offerings, and regular communication with deceased spirits. The burial chamber, prepared for the merchant, is essentially an underground house, complete with rooms for different activities, storage areas for grave goods, and spaces designed for the servants who will join him in death. The construction required months of work by skilled craftsmen, and the decoration includes precious metals, carved stone reliefs, and painted scenes depicting the journey through the underworld. This isn't just a tomb, it's infrastructure for eternal existence. As the burial ceremony begins, you witness something that challenges everything you thought you knew about ancient attitudes toward death. The people about to be sacrificed aren't protesting or trying to escape. They're participating willingly, even enthusiastically, in rituals designed to ensure their successful transition to the afterlife. From their perspective, dying with their master guarantees them continued high status in the next world, while surviving alone would leave them vulnerable to poverty, social isolation, and eventual death under much worse circumstances. The priest overseeing the burial ceremony explains the theological principles governing proper death management through a combination of ritual actions and spoken explanations. Death isn't just the end of biological function. It's a dangerous transition that requires expert guidance to complete successfully. Spirits who don't receive proper burial rites, adequate grave goods, or sufficient sacrificial companions become restless ghosts who plague the living with disease, crop failure, and social chaos. The sacrifice begins with the servants drinking cups of wine mixed with powerful drugs, then lying down in positions arranged around the merchant's body. They're not being killed violently. They're being allowed to drift peacefully into unconsciousness before the final rituals that will send their spirits to the underworld alongside their master spirit. The priest monitors their breathing carefully, timing the final ceremonies to coincide with their natural deaths from drug overdoses. While the human sacrifice is proceeding, other attendants are arranging grave goods throughout the burial chamber, food for the journey to the underworld, tools for use in the afterlife, weapons for protection against hostile spirits, jewelry and precious objects to demonstrate the deceased's earthly status, and written spells to help navigate the complex geography of death. Every object has been carefully chosen based on religious texts that describe the challenges deceased spirits will face in the realm of the dead. The merchant's wife, the last to die, uses her final conscious moments to deliver messages from the living world to deceased relatives she expects to meet in the underworld. Family members crowd around her, whispering requests for her to carry to parents, grandparents, and children who died previously. She's not just joining her husband in death. She's serving as a communication link between the community of the living and the community of the dead. When all the sacrifice victims have died, the priest performs final rituals, designed to bind their spirits to the merchant spirit and send the entire group safely to the underworld. These rituals involve burning specific combinations of incense, reciting lengthy prayers in ancient Sumerian, and sealing the burial chamber with bronze doors inscribed with protective spells. The ceremony takes most of the day, because rushing the process could result in spiritual disaster for everyone involved. But the funeral doesn't end with the burial. Over the following days, family members make regular visits to the tomb, bringing food offerings, reporting on family news, and maintaining the ongoing relationship between the living and the dead that's essential for community stability. The deceased merchant isn't gone. He's relocated to a different realm where he continues to influence family fortunes, business success, and social relationships through his spiritual power. As you observe these post-burial rituals, you begin to understand that death in ancient Babylon isn't a final ending. It's a change of status that affects Family relationships for generations. Deceased ancestors continue to participate in family decision-making through dreams, omens, and ritual consultations. Major business decisions, marriage arrangements, and political choices are made with careful attention to the wishes and advice of dead relatives who maintain active interest in family affairs. The economic implications of proper death management are staggering. Wealthy families spend enormous resources on tomb construction, grave goods, and ongoing offerings that can consume significant portions of family wealth for decades after the initial burial. Poor families who can't afford proper burial rites face not just emotional grief, but social stigma and supernatural dangers that affect their surviving members' prospects for marriage, business success, and social advancement. But perhaps most disturbing is the realization that death in ancient Babylon is often preferable to continued life under adverse circumstances. The people who died with the merchant escaped futures that might have included slavery, starvation, disease, or social degradation. In a world where life is brutal for most people, death with honor and proper ritual protection represents a form of victory over circumstances that would otherwise destroy human dignity. As you walk away from the cemetery, you're carrying knowledge that will haunt your remaining time in ancient Babylon. You now understand why people were willing to endure incredible suffering rather than die improperly, why families bankrupted themselves for funeral expenses, and why the fear of becoming a restless ghost was stronger than the fear of death itself. You've learned that in ancient urban civilization, death wasn't just a biological event. It was a complex social transaction that determined not just individual fate, but family survival across generations. The sun is setting over Babylon, casting long shadows across a city where every aspect of life is shaped by proximity to death, where survival requires constant negotiation with supernatural forces, and where your modern assumptions about individual rights, human dignity, and social progress would be not just foreign, but actively dangerous to express. You've survived longer than you had any right to expect in a civilization that would kill you for dozens of different reasons without considering the action particularly significant. You came to ancient Babylon expecting to find the roots of human civilization, the foundation of law and order, the birthplace of writing and mathematics and urban planning. Instead, you've discovered a world so alien to your modern sensibilities that survival required abandoning most of your fundamental assumptions about human nature, social organization, and moral responsibility. You've learned that civilization isn't a triumph over barbarism. It's a particular type of organized barbarism that humans developed to manage the challenges of living together in large numbers. The hanging gardens you expected to find don't exist. They're a myth created by people who never saw Babylon and couldn't imagine the reality of ancient urban life. The wise laws of Hammurabi that you read about in textbooks are instruments of systematic terror designed to maintain social order through public brutality. The religious wisdom of ancient temples is a technology for transforming human suffering into divine communication. The commercial sophistication of the world's first great trading city is a system for converting human desperation into profitable transactions. But you've also learned something profound about human adaptability, social cooperation, and the technologies that make complex civilization possible. The same people who participate enthusiastically in public executions also create art of remarkable beauty, develop mathematical concepts that won't be rediscovered for centuries, and build social institutions that will influence human organization for millennia. The brutality you've witnessed isn't a sign of primitive ignorance. It's evidence of sophisticated social engineering designed to solve problems that modern societies handle through different but equally complex methods. As darkness falls over the greatest city in the ancient world, you realize that your journey through Babylon has been more than a historical education. It's been a confrontation with the fundamental realities of human social organization that comfortable modern life allows you to ignore. You've seen what humans are actually capable of when survival is genuinely at stake. When social order depends on immediate and visible consequences for antisocial behavior, and when individual rights are subordinated to community survival. The screams that woke you this morning have faded into the background noise of urban life because you've learned that systematic violence is just one of the technologies that complex societies use to maintain themselves. The hunger that drove you to desperate negotiations in the marketplace has taught you that economics is ultimately about managing scarcity through social organization, regardless of whether that organization seems fair or humane by modern standards. The fear that has colored every interaction you've had in this city has shown you that social hierarchy isn't an unfortunate side effect of civilization. It's one of the fundamental methods humans use to coordinate large-scale cooperation. Your time in ancient Babylon is ending, but the knowledge you're carrying back to your own time will permanently change your understanding of human nature, social progress, and the true costs of the comfortable modern life you once took for granted. You've learned that civilization is far more fragile, far more brutal, and far more amazing than you ever imagined. Welcome back to the 21st century, where the same fundamental human drives that created ancient Babylon continue to operate beneath the surface of modern society, managed by different technologies, but serving the same basic functions. Try to remember what you learned about the thin line between order and chaos, the real foundations of social cooperation, and the actual price of human progress. The comfortable illusions of modern life will try to make you forget, but the screams of ancient Babylon echo through every city that humans have ever built. And remember, you didn't last a day there without becoming part of the very system you thought you were just observing. None of us would have us.